I didn't think the house was strange at first. That's the part that bothers me the most. Now, when my wife Erin first suggested we move, I assumed she meant closer to her job or into a better school district. Instead, she sent me a listing with 3 blurry photos and a price that made my stomach tighten. Something's wrong with this. I said. Erin smiled and said it's just old. The house sat at the end of a gravel road that didn't appear on Google Maps, not missing, just unnamed, no street sign, no address marker. The GPS stopped guiding us about a quarter-mile out and calmly announced we had arrived, even though we were still driving. The house waited at the tree line, paint the color of old teeth, windows dark but unbroken. It didn't look abandoned. It looked paused. The realtor didn't come inside with us. She said, "I'll wait out here to quickly yell if you need me inside." Everything smelled faintly of dust and cold iron. The layout made sense room to room, but the proportions felt wrong. Hallways a little too long, ceilings a little too high, the kind of place where your footsteps echo back half a second late. Erin loved it immediately. I noticed the door frames. Every doorway had shallow grooves carved into the wood, about shoulder height, not scratches, intentional marks, evenly spaced, like someone had dragged something heavy through again and again. "What's that?" I asked. Erin frowned with the wood. She looked directly at the grooves and said, "It's just where we bought the house 2 weeks later." The first night I dreamed I was standing in the hallway outside our bedroom. I could hear breathing behind me. When I turned around, the hallway was longer than it should have been. The walls stretched away, bending slightly inward like ribs. The breathing grew louder, wet and uneven, but no matter how far I walked, I never reached the end. I woke up with my heart racing. Erin slept peacefully beside me over breakfast. I mentioned the dream. "That's weird." She said, "I dreamed I was walking toward our room. I could see the light under the door, but I couldn't get closer." We laughed it off. That was the last time we laughed about it. Things changed slowly, which is why I didn't leave the house. Began to feel observant, not haunted, not alive, just aware. Doors stayed where we left them, but sometimes they felt heavier to open, like pushing against pressure. The mirrors reflected us accurately, but occasionally I caught Erin staring at her reflection with confusion, like she was checking to make sure it still matched. Then came the discrepancies. One afternoon, Erin asked me why I repainted the spare room. "I didn't," I said. She frowned. "You? Did it used to be green?" It had never been green. I knew that I remembered the beige walls clearly, but when I went to look, the room was pale green. That night, I found an old photo on my phone. Moving day, the spare room, green walls. My stomach dropped. Memory errors happen. I told myself stress adjustment. Then Erin forgot the pantry door existed. She stood in the kitchen one evening, frustrated, opening cabinets. "Where did we put the food?" she asked. "In the pantry," I said, pointing. She stared at the door like it offended her. "That's a broom closet." It wasn't. I opened it. "Shelves, cans, rice, everything normal," she screamed. After that, the house stopped pretending. I started finding spaces that didn't exist before. Short hallways, branching off familiar rooms. Doors where there had been blank wall, they always led somewhere almost familiar. A room that looked like our bedroom, but wrong. A bathroom with a mirror that reflected the room behind me incorrectly. The grooves in the door frames deepened. I measured them. Each was exactly the width of a human shoulder. Erin stopped noticing the changes entirely. She insisted that house had always been this way. When I begged her to leave, she looked at me with pity. "This is our home," she said. "Why are you acting like a guest?" That night, I heard footsteps pacing the hallway for hours. When I opened the door, the hallway was short. Again empty, but the grooves on the frame were deeper. I finally spoke to the realtor. Her face went pale when I mentioned the address. "You're not supposed to stay long," she whispered. "People usually don't." "What happens?" I demanded. She shook her head. "Everyone remembers it differently. That's how it keeps you arguing, comparing notes. Doubting yourselves keeps us from what." She looked at me, and eyes wet from noticing who's missing. I started keeping a journal every morning. I wrote down the layout of the house, every door, every hallway, every Room by evening. The journal was wrong. Sometimes the handwriting wasn't mine. I found entries describing rooms I'd never seen written in my style, but with unfamiliar phrasing it's easier if you stop counting the house needs consistency. Someone has to fit. Erin stopped sleeping in the bedroom. She said it didn't feel like ours anymore. She started using a room at the end of a hallway. I could never quite remember walking down one night. I followed her the hallway. Stretched, the air grew cold at the end, was a doorframe with grooves worn smooth, like they'd been touched thousands of times. The room beyond was small, no windows, no furniture, just Erin standing in the center. She smiled when she saw me. I remember. Now remember what I whispered. She placed her shoulders against the grooves. They fit her perfectly. The house doesn't change, she said gently. We do. The walls shifted, the hallway shortened behind me. The doorframe pressed inward. Erin screamed, not in fear, but in relief, as the grooves swallowed her shape. The wood bending, reshaping ceiling, when it was over, the hallway was normal again. The spare room was beige. The house was quiet. I tried to leave. The road didn't connect to anything anymore. The GPS insisted I was home. The journal now contains only one sentence written over and over, in different handwriting. Everyone else remembers the house differently. This morning, I noticed new grooves in the bedroom doorframe. They're my height there. Getting deeper if you're reading this, and you're thinking of buying a cheap old house that just feels right. Please take pictures, write things down. And if someone you love starts remembering things differently, then you do leave. I was used to staying home alone when I was young. My parents often had to travel because their parents were sick overseas, and my older siblings would not get home until long after I finished school. I got used to the quiet of the house and actually enjoyed the freedom it gave me. I liked wandering from room to room, exploring the old furniture and imagining stories about the people who might have lived there before us. The old house creaked sometimes when the wind blew, and shadows moved across the walls in ways that made me pause and look twice. One Saturday, when I was 12, my parents went to a funeral in the next city. My brother had moved out, and my sister was nowhere to be found, so I was left alone for the entire day. I was thrilled. The idea of having the whole house to myself made my heart race with excitement. I ran through the rooms, turning on lights and music, and imagining that I owned the entire world. For a few precious hours, we had turned my brother's bedroom into an office for my computer, and I spent most of my time there dialing up the internet on our slow connection and calling my friend, who lived a few streets over. She said she was upset about her boyfriend and needed someone to talk to, so she decided to come over. I ran to the kitchen to grab some snacks while waiting, and that's when I first noticed her, a pale woman dressed entirely in black, her hair pulled into a tight bun, standing at the corner of the hallway, her head tilted in a way that made my skin crawl. I thought for a second that she was smiling, even though I could not see her eyes clearly. I froze for a moment, but told myself I was imagining things, and ran outside to wait for my friend. When she arrived, she asked why I was standing outside. I said something weird happened, but I would explain it over hot chocolate. We went inside, and I tried to calm down while she told me about her problems. We drank our drinks, and then went upstairs to my computer room to check on her boyfriend while she called him. I set up the webcam, and that's when I saw her again in the hallway. My friend noticed too, and her eyes went wide. She whispered, "There's a woman in your hallway, wearing a black dress." I felt my stomach drop and closed the door immediately. We bolted downstairs, and I called my parents, who were still on their way, and told them about it, but they didn't believe me. The next few days were strange. Objects would move on their own, small things would disappear, and I would find my calendar upside down on the wall. Sometimes I would hear footsteps upstairs, even though I knew I was alone. I started locking doors and windows, but it didn't help. The feeling never went away. Months later, we adopted a cat from the shelter, and from the first day, she would hiss and meow at corners of the house for no reason. She would stare at them, then suddenly leap back as if she had seen something terrifying. One of her favorite spots was in my bedroom, and lately every night she would sit there staring and yowling at whatever was in the corner. I never saw it, but I could feel it watching me sometimes. I would hear whispers at night when the wind was still, and I would swear I could hear footsteps pacing the hall. Even when I knew I was alone, I started leaving lights on and checking the house over and over, but the feeling never left me. I began imagining what it wanted, or why it was there. Sometimes I would dream of the woman in black standing at the end of the hallway watching me, and I would wake up sweating, heart racing. I started noticing little things more: the shadows stretching oddly across walls, objects moved when I wasn't looking, and sometimes I felt a cold hand brush past my arm. But when I turned, nothing was there. The house had changed into something alive. It wasn't just empty walls. It was watching, listening, and waiting. I began to tell my friends about it, but they laughed and said it was just my imagination. I knew it wasn't imagination because my cat would react the same way every night. I tried to leave for school early to avoid being alone, but even when I was gone, I would return and feel the house looking at me. The woman in black never spoke. She never moved, but her presence was heavier than anything I had ever felt. I started sleeping with the lights on and leaving doors open. I even put my computer chair in the doorway to block the hallway, but it didn't matter. It was patient and persistent. It would appear whenever I was alone. The months passed, and the house seemed to breathe with her silent presence sometimes. I would hear faint whispers coming from the corners. I would hear footsteps pacing the floors above, and the scratching of nails along the walls. The cat would hiss and scream at the same corners, and sometimes I would hear her faint laughter echoing down the hallway. The sensation never left me. I began to notice that the shadows moved with her, even when she wasn't visible. It was as if the house itself had become her, and even when my parents were home, it was different. She seemed to retreat, but never gone. Sometimes I would see a flash of her black dress in the corner of my eye, and I would turn to look, and nothing was there, but the feeling of being watched never went away. It was like she was waiting for something, and I had no idea what she wanted. I started staying in the living room with the lights on, reading or playing games on my computer to avoid the hallway. But even then, I could feel her presence lingering at the edges of my vision sometimes. I would hear the soft creak of the stairs, as if someone were slowly descending toward me. My cat would arch her back and hiss and suddenly sprint across the room. Sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night to a shadow looming over my bed, and I would hold my breath, pretending to be asleep, hoping she would leave eventually. She always did, but the feeling never went away. The house became a place of constant vigilance for me. Every corner could hide her. Every shadow could be her waiting, watching, and I began to realize that this was not just a house or a ghost. She was a presence that consumed the spaces around her, and the longer I stayed in the house, the more aware I became of it. I could feel it, even when I was outside the walls. I could feel it waiting silently in the corners of rooms I had left behind. Sometimes I would return after school to find things in different places, objects that I knew I hadn't moved, and I would see the faint outline of a black dress in the corner of the hall. I never saw her face, just the dark figure and the sense that she was watching and listening, patiently waiting. And over time, I began to understand that she was part of the house. Now she moved with it and through it, and perhaps through me too. And though I would grow older and move on from that house, I could feel her presence lingering in my mind, the way a shadow never completely disappears, even when the sun shines too brightly. I have worked as a county road maintenance dispatcher for nearly 16 years, most of them on the overnight shift, the hours when nothing is supposed to happen, and when anything that does feels wrong. My job was simple: on paper, monitor rural road sensors, answer emergency maintenance calls, coordinate snowplows, fallen trees, flooded crossings. The county I cover is mostly farmland, forests, and long Empty stretches of two-lane road that disappear into darkness after midnight. People assume nothing happens out there, but the truth is the opposite things just happen quietly. The first strange incident occurred late October 3 years ago, at exactly 1:39 a.m., a time that would later burn itself into my memory. A maintenance alert triggered on my console, not a crash, not a blockage, just a motion sensor ping from County Road G, the oldest stretch of asphalt we still technically maintained, even though it had been officially closed since the early 90s due to erosion. The alert made no sense because the sensors along that road had been dead for years. I logged into the diagnostics expecting a system error, but the signal was clean active and repeating every 30 seconds. Like footsteps, I opened the audio channel tied to the sensor system and heard nothing at first, just wind, then very faintly, a sound like breathing too close to a microphone. Before I could process it, a voice came through, calm, slow, and unmistakably human. "Hello, is anyone monitoring this road?" The voice belonged to a man middle-aged, by the sound of it slightly strained, like he was trying not to panic. I responded using protocol. "County Maintenance Dispatch. Identify your emergency." There was a pause. Then the man said, "I think I am lost. I was driving, and the road just kept going." I told him Road G had been closed for decades and asked where he entered it. He sounded confused, said the GPS rerouted him around construction, that he had been driving for hours with no intersections, no lights, just trees. He said his headlights barely reached the road ahead, like the darkness was swallowing them. I asked him to stay in his vehicle and described nearby landmarks, but he interrupted me, saying there was something standing ahead in the road, something tall that wasn't moving. I heard him swallow hard, and he whispered, "It doesn't reflect the light." I told him to reverse immediately, to turn around, but he said the road behind him was gone, not blocked, not dark, just gone, like it never existed. The audio feed suddenly filled with static and a low dragging sound like something scraping asphalt. Then the line cut out completely. I dispatched a sheriff and a maintenance truck to the last known access point of Road G. They found nothing, no vehicle, no tire marks, no disturbance, just cracked pavement swallowed by weeds. The sheriff suggested it was a prank or a malfunction and advised me to log it as such. I didn't sleep for the rest of the shift. A week later, at 1:39 a.m., the same sensor triggered again. This time, the voice was different, younger female, crying quietly. She said she was walking home after her car broke down, and the road would not end. She kept passing the same broken mile marker over and over. She said there were shapes in the trees pacing her, staying just out of sight. When I asked her to stop moving and sit down, she started screaming, saying the ground beneath her feet felt soft, like it was breathing. The audio picked up a wet, rhythmic sound and something like a distant chorus, whispering all at once. Then silence again. No trace found. My supervisor told me to stop escalating ghost stories and threatened disciplinary action if I wasted resources again. I started researching Road G on my own, digging through county archives, microfilm, old survey maps. The road was built in the 1940s to connect two farming towns, but construction halted after multiple unexplained disappearances. Workers claimed equipment would vanish overnight. Sections of completed road would reappear miles away, warped and cracked. The final incident was in 1961, when a survey crew reported a man matching their foreman walking ahead of them, even though the foreman was standing beside them. When they called out, the figure turned, and they realized it had no face, just a smooth, dark surface where features should be. The road was quietly closed after that, labeled unsafe due to ground instability. No official mention of the missing people. The calls continued every week, always at 1:39 a.m. Always different voices, drivers, hikers. Once even a maintenance worker who claimed he was dispatched there and couldn't find his way back. He begged me not to send anyone else, saying the road learns. The line always ended the same way, static, dragging footsteps, a final breath. The last call came 6 months ago. It was my own voice on the line, calm, terrified, asking for directions, saying, I could see myself standing in the road ahead, staring back at me when I tried to disconnect. The console froze, the sensor counter began climbing, rapidly, like something was running toward the access point. Then everything stopped the next day. Road G was removed entirely from the county system, like it never existed. The sensors were gone. The maps updated overnight. My supervisor claimed it had always been that way, but sometimes when I work late and the office is quiet, I swear, I hear the low scrape of something heavy moving just beneath the building like asphalt being dragged across. Dirt, and at 1:39 a.m. every night, my console flickers waiting for me to answer. Flicker stopped after a few seconds, and nothing else happened. No alarm, no voice, no static, just the normal hum of equipment. I finished my shift and went home telling myself it was stress, but the feeling didn't leave 2 days later. Internal audit requested my logs, specifically anything related to Road G. They said it was part of a routine data cleanup. The request was formal, written, and signed. I handed over everything: sensor timestamps, audio metadata, dispatch records. A week after that, an investigator from the county transportation office interviewed me. He didn't ask about voices or fear. He asked about procedures, whether I had ever overridden routing, protocols, or manually open-closed systems. I answered truthfully no. A month later, I was informed that several calls I remembered clearly did not exist in the official server backups. Only my typed notes remained. Audio files were missing. Timestamps corrupted. The sensors, according to IT, had never reactivated after being decommissioned. Years earlier, they suggested I might have mistaken test pings or residual data noise for real events. I was offered medical leave, which I declined, then reassigned. Today's shift, shortly after I resigned on my own, the final development came quietly through a public records request. I filed myself after leaving the job. The county responded with a short notice, stating that Road G had been fully removed from all jurisdictional responsibility in 1994, and that no incidents, missing persons, or maintenance activity had been associated with it since that date. Attached was a list of employees who had worked my position before me. One name was missing, replaced by a blank line labeled unavailable. When I followed up, I was told the personnel file had been lost during a records migration error. I let it go. I moved out of the county, took another job, and stopped thinking about roads altogether. But last winter, I was driving through a neighboring state, late at night, detoured by construction. My GPS rerouted me briefly onto an unnumbered road before correcting itself. It was only a few seconds, but the asphalt looked older, narrower, and for that moment my headlights felt weak, like they weren't reaching far enough ahead. I checked the clock on the dashboard without thinking it. Read 1:39 a.m. I pulled over immediately and turned around. Nothing happened, no figures, no voices, just silence. I arrived home safely and never reported it, but I keep the dashcam footage saved because when I reviewed it later, the reroute never appears on the map overlay, and according to the data, I was never off the highway at all. I first saw the house because of a paperwork error. I was working part-time for the municipal records office, digitizing old property files that had been sitting in metal cabinets since before I was born. Most of it was routine deeds, boundary disputes, foreclosures, the kind of history that feels dead because no one remembers the people anymore. One folder didn't belong where it was filed. Wrong street, wrong district. No demolition record, no sale, no transfer, just an address, handwritten and fading. Ink with the word status unresolved stamped across the front. The address led to the outskirts of town, beyond the new developments, past the point where streetlights thin out and roads lose their painted lines. The house didn't appear on modern maps. GPS dropped the route halfway there and tried to reroute me back toward the highway. I had to follow the old county survey instead, printed on brittle paper that smelled faintly of dust and mildew. The house sat at the end of a gravel lane, nearly reclaimed by weeds. It wasn't traumatic, No looming towers, no broken shutters. Just a two-story structure with faded siding and a porch that sagged slightly in the middle. As if it had grown tired of holding itself upright, the windows were intact. The door was closed. Nothing about it suggested abandonment. At first glance it looked like someone might return any day, and that was what unsettled me most. There were no signs posted, no condemnation. Notice no utilities connected according to the file. The last registered occupants had left 20 years earlier. No explanation, no death certificates, no relocation records. Just absence. The front door wasn't locked. Opened easily, without resistance, without the shriek of neglected hinges inside. The air was cool and dry. No rot, no animal smell. The furniture was still there. Couch, a dining table, a bookshelf half filled with paperbacks. Dust lay evenly over everything, undisturbed, like a blanket placed deliberately, rather than something accumulated. The house was quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Not the quiet of isolation, but the kind of quiet you get when something is being suppressed. No distant traffic, no wind. Even my breathing sounded too loud. I started in the living room taking photos. The walls were bare, except for faint outlines where pictures had once hung. Nails still embedded, bent slightly downward. The carpet showed clear wear paths between the couch and the hallway. Someone had walked those lines. Often in the kitchen, the table was set, plates, cups, a bowl with the fossilized remains of cereal. No mold, no insects. The refrigerator was empty, but clean. Unplugged. The calendar on the wall was turned to October. No year, written several dates, circled in pencil. All circles stopped after the third week. Upstairs, the air felt denser, warmer. The hallway carpet was pressed flat like it had been walked recently. Despite the dust, 3 bedrooms, one clearly a child's bed, made, toys arranged neatly, not abandoned in chaos, but left with intention. The second bedroom was empty except for a dresser and a single chair placed in the center. Facing the door. Chairs don't end up like that accidentally. The third room was locked. The doorframe showed deep scratch marks near the latch, layered over each other. The wood smoother there than anywhere else. I didn't force it. I documented what I could and left that night. I dreamed of the hallway, not moving, just standing at the far end, watching the doors, waiting for one to open. I returned the next day, telling myself it was professional curiosity. But that was a lie. The locked door opened with a key taped beneath. The stair rail hidden, but not carefully, as if meant to be found. Inside was a bare room, a mattress on the floor, and a thick notebook resting in the center. The walls were covered in faint pencil markings, rubbed out again and again until the surface looked bruised. Fragments of words remained. Stay awake. Don't answer it. Here's when you stop. Writing. The notebook wasn't a diary. It was a log. Dates, times, notes written in different handwritings, sometimes neat, sometimes frantic. Entries about noises in the walls, about someone knocking on the bedroom door at night from inside the house, about a routine of staying awake until sunrise because sleeping made it worse. The last entry ended mid-sentence. No blood, no struggle, no signs of violence. I reported everything. The house was boarded up. Weeks later, classified unsafe, unfit for habitation. Months passed. Then one evening, while working late, I found a new digital entry under my name, automatically logged a site visit to that same address, dated that morning, with photos attached. Photos I didn't take angles from. Inside the locked room, the final image showed the notebook open to a blank page with a single fresh line written across it. Someone came back. I contacted my supervisor, immediately assuming a system error or file corruption, but the metadata was clean. Timestamp, GPS coordinates, device ID, all matched my work phone, which had been on my desk all day untouched. The photos showed details I had never documented: the underside of the mattress, the inside of the closet, the wall behind where the hide notebook had been, as if someone had moved through the room methodically after it was sealed the next day. I drove past the property again, despite telling myself not to. The boards were still in place. County tape unbroken, the gravel lane undisturbed. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing to suggest anyone had been there recently. I didn't go inside. I just sat in the car for several minutes listening. There was no sound at all. Not birds, not wind, not even the distant highway. It was the same. Oppressive quiet, I remembered, and it made my chest feel tight, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. I left and tried to forget about it. Weeks went by, nothing else happened. Then a letter arrived at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a single photocopied page from the notebook. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from the final section, the part that had ended mid-sentence. But now it was complete. The sentence read, "If we stop recording, it uses us to continue." There was a new line beneath. It written more carefully, almost calmly. It said, "Thank you for keeping the house awake." I reported the letter to the police. They took a statement, logged it, and never followed up. The house was quietly removed from the county database shortly after, listed as demolished years earlier when I searched the address. It no longer existed. Not just officially, but practically. The road name was gone, replaced by an extension of a nearby route, as if it had always been that way. I moved shortly after, changed jobs, stopped working with records altogether. Sometimes late at night, I wake up convinced I hear a soft rhythmic sound like pencil on paper coming from somewhere. In my apartment, I've checked every room, every time. There's nothing there, no notebook, no marks, no evidence. But I've started keeping a journal anyway, writing dates, times, small details about my day. Because on the nights when I don't sleep, and in the morning there are gaps in my memory, hours I can't account for, and once I woke to find a single sentence written on the last page in handwriting that wasn't mine. The house is quieter now. Moved into the house in late October. A 2-story Victorian at the edge of town that had been empty for almost a decade. The realtor called it full of potential, and I told myself it was just the right kind of quiet I needed after years in the city. The yard was overgrown, the paint peeling in long vertical strips, the windows dusty and opaque with grime. The front door creaked when I pushed it open, revealing a hall that smelled of wet plaster and something older, a faint mustiness like books forgotten in a basement. I carried boxes up the stairs, noting how the floorboards groaned under my weight in ways that seemed unusually deliberate, like the house was aware of my presence, calculating my steps. That first night I slept poorly, waking every hour to the subtle sound of shifting wood, faint creaks that didn't correspond to the wind. I told myself it was old timber settling, imagination, nothing more. By the second night, the unease had deepened. I had unpacked the kitchen and found a stack of newspapers from 10 years prior, neatly placed as if someone had left them just yesterday. The headlines were mundane, local stories, yet each paper carried a faint odor of damp soil, as though buried for decades before appearing on my countertop. I tried to focus on arranging the cabinets, but kept glancing at the corners of the room, feeling like I was being watched. The living room had a large fireplace, blackened and cold, and on the mantel lay a small ceramic bird, its glaze cracked and dulled, perfectly positioned to catch my eye whenever I passed. The third night I awoke to a sound like paper dragging across floorboards. I assumed it was a branch scraping the window, but the sound repeated, soft, deliberate, circling around my bedroom door. I lay frozen, listening to each scrape, realizing it stopped whenever I held my breath. At first, I thought it was a raccoon or rodent, but the absence of any claw marks or movement outside the door told me something else entirely. I left the bedroom at dawn to find that the journal I had set on the kitchen counter had shifted several inches, open to a blank page. I had not touched it. No wind had come in. No one else had a key. And yet the page bore faint indentations, as though someone had written and then erased a note too quickly for the ink to register. Days passed. Each night the sounds increased. Soft taps on walls, scratches on floors, whispers I couldn't understand. I recorded them on my phone, tried to catch them with cameras, but nothing appeared. The house was silent to any device, but deafening to me. I began to notice changes in myself small. At first a stiffness in my shoulders, a twinge in my wrist, a tension I could not shake. Objects I placed on tables moved slightly in the night, always in the direction of the hallway leading to the attic. I told myself I was exhausted, the product of moving, of isolation. I never entered the attic the first week. On the 8th night, I carried a flashlight up the narrow stairs. The door at the top was swollen with age, but it opened with a groan. Inside, the room smelled sharply of earth and mildew. The floor was bare, except for a small trunk in the center. I approached cautiously. When I lifted the lid, I found old photographs of the house's previous residents, faded and curling. Each person in the images stared directly at the camera, but their eyes felt wrong, too aware, as if they were observing the present as well as the past. Beneath the photographs was a note folded neatly. Do not leave. Stay here. Watch. Learn. I recoiled, nearly dropping the trunk. The handwriting was elegant, precise, and familiar in a way that unsettled me. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I sat in the living room, flashlight in hand, journal beside me. By morning, the journal contained words I did not write. The house remembers you. I tried to tear the page out, burn it, hide it, but every night the journal filled again. Sometimes with drawings, sometimes with text, always addressing me directly. I stopped leaving the house except to buy groceries, always returning before sunset. I noticed that my perception of time was changing. Days blurred. I would enter a room, and it would feel like hours, sometimes days, had passed even though only minutes elapsed. Objects shifted subtly when I wasn't looking. A chair turned a fraction of an inch. A book moved a few centimeters. A photograph tilted toward me. The air smelled richer in some rooms, damp and fertile, almost like moss and decayed leaves, and yet entirely contained inside the house. I began to hear voices in the walls, low murmurs in patterns I could not understand. They were not angry or cruel, just deliberate. The sound resonated in my bones. On the 20th night, I discovered a small crack in the floorboards beneath the kitchen sink, fine and hairline. When I pressed my finger against it, a vibration traveled up my arm, subtle but undeniable, synchronized with my pulse. I withdrew immediately, but the sensation lingered. My limbs began to feel slightly heavier, as though the floor was absorbing weight from them, anchoring me. By the end of the month, I felt connected to the house in ways I could not explain. When I moved, the floors seemed to shift to accommodate me. When I touched walls, the plaster felt warmer, almost living, yielding slightly under my palm. The journal now addressed me as resident, never by name. It instructed me to clean, to maintain, to observe. I followed its guidance obsessively, discovering that the attic had sections I had never noticed before. Hidden panels and small closets behind walls that led to rooms, filled with objects placed with uncanny precision. Stacks of books, jars of soil, small plants growing in perfect alignment, and photographs of people I did not know staring at me from within glass frames. Weeks turned into months. I rarely slept, only moving slowly through the house, adjusting, arranging, observing. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding slightly when I walked near, contracting when I sat still. My reflection in the windows became harder to recognize. Features elongated subtly, eyes wider, face thinner, as if the house reshaped me to fit its geometry. One evening, I went to the attic, and the journal lay open on the floor. I had not touched it that day. The page contained a single sentence. The visitor will arrive tonight. Prepare. I waited. Hours passed. Midnight came. Nothing. Then the front door clicked. I did not move. Footsteps crossed the hallway slowly, deliberate. I listened as a shadow passed across the living room, brushing the furniture lightly, testing, observing. My heart raced, but I felt rooted, almost anchored to the floorboards. I wanted to flee, but my body refused. Every fiber waited by the house. The footsteps stopped at the foot of the stairs. Silence followed. Then the journal shifted again, a pen scratching on paper without anyone holding it. You are ready. I understood without thinking. The house had claimed me, trained me, measured me, integrated me into its architecture, its memory, its awareness. I no longer occupied space in the ordinary sense. I was part of the house. The visitor never came. The journal remained open, the words dissolving into the fibers of the paper as if the house itself had absorbed them. Outside, the street remained quiet, empty, autumn leaves pressed against the windows. Inside, I moved from room to room, not walking, not floating, but existing in the way a floor exists, the way a wall exists, aware of every vibration, every sound, every minute change, anticipating it. The house was no longer a shelter. It was an organism, and I was the pulse at its center, the silent observer, the hidden memory, the keeper of its history. Nights passed. Months passed. My reflection no longer returned my gaze. Objects shifted without anyone touching them. The house breathed slowly, rhythmically, the walls settling with a patience older than me. I had become permanent, immovable, the anchor, the witness, the silent heart of a structure that would outlast me in every conceivable way. And I understood then that nothing outside mattered. The outside world could vanish entirely. But inside, I existed forever, fully integrated, fully remembered, fully trapped in a place that would never let me leave and would never allow anyone else to truly see it again. This story may not be scary in the sense other ones are, but at the time, it was very unsettling. It took place in Glasgow in 2011. I went to a college outside the city center, and this story involves a couple of people on my course, which was television. Broadcasting production. Louise Dawson was a very well-liked student on the course. She was very friendly, very bubbly, and very pretty. She had bright dyed red hair and very pale skin. She looked a little like Hayley Williams from Pamour. There were a couple of guys on the course who were friends with her, but were obviously keen on being more than friends with her. This was a time before. I was aware of the incel community, and I was naive about how some young men view women. These guys made sexist comments and would make inappropriate jokes about women. These two guys, Mike and James, were obsessed with filmmaking and the internet. They had allegedly both made inappropriate comments to Louise, and although she didn't appreciate them, she appeared not to let it bother her. I hadn't heard any of these comments myself, but in hindsight, I wish I'd stepped in. I did once ask her if Shed liked me to have a word, but she said no, and seemed very confident that Shed handle it if things went too far. She was sure they were just joking and were immature. As the months passed on the course, things seemed fine, and I forgot about the things Louise had highlighted about James and Mike. Towards the end of the course, we were tasked with making 2-minute short films, and our course lecturer divided us all into teams of 3. You can probably guess who Louise ended up with on her team. My short film was a very poorly made science fiction comedy, which wasn't remotely funny. Louise's film was meant to be a crime thriller, which sounded really good, but it didn't really work out like this. So the story goes Louise, Mike, and James scripted their short film and seemed happy with their script. When it came to filming, I should say that we were allowed to use actors, or we could act in the films ourselves. Louise didn't really want to act in her film, however she was convinced to do it by James and Mike. They filmed their short in James' house, and Louise was to play the victim of a home invasion. His parents were away on holiday, so they'd have the house to themselves. When it came to filming Louise, was to sit in a chair and be taped to it. James and Mike ducked, taped her wrists and arms to the armrests of the chair, and then they taped her ankles together. Record was then pressed on the camera. She was feeling a little anxious at this point, as there was something very off about their demeanor, and Louise wished she had refused to be the actor for this scene. She was about to suggest. They paused, but before she could get the words out, she felt duct tape quickly being wrapped around her mouth. This took her by surprise, as this was not in the script. Her nostrils were flaring, and she tried talking, but her mouth was heavily taped. So this was not possible. She tried to say, "What the fuck are you guys doing?" but no words made it through the tape. Louise said she was sure she was having a nightmare at this point, and closed her eyes, hoping to wake up. However, when she opened her eyes, she was devastated to realize she was bound and gagged in James' house for real. She caught her reflection in a nearby mirror and said her cheeks were bulging over the shiny silver duct tape, and her hair was in agony as the tape was applied very tightly to it. The camera had been turned on, and James and Mike were now just staring at Louise behind the camera. She was breathing very loudly through her nose and was terrified. They finally said, after many minutes, "We know this isn't part of your script, but we thought we'd improvise." Louise was terrified and confused. "We know you weren't keen to act, so we added this to get that reaction from you. It looks great." Louise was shocked that this was part of some weird improvised segment, that these two creeps had added purely to get a genuine reaction from her. These were short films for a film course that nobody would watch. They weren't supposed to be Oscar-nominated shorts, so the fact these two took it this far was disturbing. They began to remove the gag from Louis's mouth, and she grunted and mumbled as her hair was being pulled out with the removal of the tape. As soon as the final piece of tape was removed from her mouth, she began screaming at them and rightly berated them for this. They were apparently shocked and stunned. Louise demanded they cut off her arms and feet and then stormed out of James' house. Our course lecturer spoke to both of them, and both were only given a warning about this. We couldn't believe it. If anything, they should have been kicked off the course, at the very least. To make things more infuriating, both of these creeps continue to work in the TV industry to some degree. Louise does too, and she has been very successful. I have also been grateful to have had a successful career in television here in the UK for the last decade or so, but the fact that these two continue to work in the industry, despite their views and behavior, leaves a bad taste in the mouth. The television and film industries obviously have a very bad record for having unsavory people in front of and behind the camera, so in some ways, I'm not surprised that these two are still present in the industry. But I do wonder if they have done anything else like this. I hope they have matured and moved on, but it bothers me that Louise didn't get any form of justice for this incident. I don't know who else to talk to about this. I guess I just need to talk to somebody who doesn't live here. This all started a few weeks back. The neighborhood watch in my area has always been more of a joke than anything. It's a quiet suburb, so aside from the occasional coyote sighting, there doesn't tend to be much cause for alarm. It makes the older folks feel safer, though, and it gives the guys on watch a sense of purpose. Whenever we see the watch out and about, we'll offer them a cold drink or maybe a snack, chat about life. It's a fairly close-knit neighborhood, so we try to take care of each other. They are primarily retired. One of them used to be on the police force here in town, and it comforts him to feel like he's still doing his part to keep his neighborhood safe. His name is Jim. The other guys are Donnie, Carl, and Dion. Donnie puts together model planes in his spare time. Dion has 5 grandkids and used to work for the Postal Service. And Carl is a conspiracy theorist. You pick these things up when you live in a tight-knit community like this. Everyone here knows each other. That's what makes this such a weird thing. About 3 weeks ago, a neighborhood watch got a call from this quiet family that lived a street or so over from me, complaining about strange noises coming from outside their house. I was outside smoking a cigarette when I saw Donnie hustling over in his golf cart with a sense of urgency I rarely witness out here. I asked him what the occasion was, and he told me the Millers called in, sounding a little panicked. The Millers mostly kept to themselves, so I was surprised to hear that they even called our neighborhood watch for this. He went about his business, and I put out my cigarette and went to bed. The next day, I saw Donnie doing rounds around the little neighborhood park while I was coming home from shopping for groceries, and curiosity got the better of me, so I pulled over to ask him about it. "Hey, Donnie." I waved out of my window at him, and he waved back cheerfully. "Did you find anything over at the Miller's house last night?" Donnie's smile faded into a blank stare, confusion muddling his eyebrows together. "I beg your pardon, Adam? You were investigating some kind of noise complaint at the Millers last night, remember?" I half laughed, not expecting that kind of reaction from him. Who the hell are the Millers? He also half laughed, as though he felt left out of some joke. I paused, wondering if Donnie's mental faculties might be starting to deteriorate in his old age. That would be heartbreaking. The Millers. You know, the family in the corner house on Carmen Ave? He stared at me for a long moment, with a look on his face that suggested he was worried that I was the one losing my mental faculties. "Adam, that house is empty. Nobody lives there." I opened my mouth and then closed it again. I wasn't sure how to interpret what was happening in this conversation, but it didn't seem like it was going to be productive. "Okay, Donnie, maybe I misunderstood. Thanks for looking out for the neighborhood." I rolled up my window and started driving home, but there was weight in my stomach now that wasn't there before. I couldn't quite place it, but something about his certainty felt wrong. It was off-putting. I drove past my driveway and straight to the corner house on Carmen Avenue. There was no car parked outside like there usually was. I walked up and rang the doorbell, rehearsing made-up reasons for being there in my head. No answer. I waited a bit and rang the doorbell again. Maybe they just weren't home. That would explain why the car wasn't there. I sighed, shook my head at my own paranoia, and went home. When my girlfriend got home from work, I decided to talk to her about it. "Lavra, the weirdest thing just happened. Do you remember how I told you that Donnie was going to check out the Miller's place last night?" She stared at me like I had just accused her of adultery. "Who are the Millers?" I blinked. "The Millers, Laura, with the 3 little kids. They live on the corner lot 1 house street over. They brought us banana bread for Christmas one year." She was staring at me in horror. "What are you talking about? Are you setting me up with some kind of punchline? Nobody has ever brought us banana bread for Christmas, and nobody lives in that house." I deflated a little. She started putting her things away, but with a look on her face like she felt just as confused as I did. Over the course of the next week, I asked a few more people about it, but they all agreed that there was never a family called the Millers that lived in that house. In fact, they couldn't even remember the last time that house was occupied. I started wondering if I had just imagined them, if I had just imagined Donnie talking about going there the other night. I went into a rabbit hole on the internet about the Mandela effect. I didn't get much sleep for a few days, but ended up chalking it up to just one of those things for my own sanity and tried to move on. I coasted on that for about a week. One night, my girlfriend got home late from work and looked suspiciously concerned. I asked her what was up, and she mentioned running into Dion on the way home. He was rushing over to Alex and Tanya's place in response to them reporting strange sounds coming from outside of their house. I could tell she was troubled. "Adam, didn't you say Donnie told you the same thing about some other family last week? The Miltons or something?" She asked, incredulous but uncomfortable with the familiarity. "The Millers," I sighed. "Only he doesn't remember that happening, and everyone is telling me the Millers don't exist." Her lips pursed. "I have never seen a family in that house. And I don't know a family called the Millers, but it's weird. It's weird that I just experienced the same conversation with Dion. She swallowed hard. Do you think maybe you dreamed it? Maybe it was a, uh, a premonition? I was wide awake, Lavra, my voice half cracked in defeat that she was still questioning my accounts of that night. It wasn't a dream, but I don't know what it was. I'm the only person who thinks it happened. My mind started racing. Alex was a good friend of mine. We were hiking buddies, and we often hit the bar together to watch football during the playoffs. Laura loved Tanya. They exchanged recipes and used each other as guinea pigs when they tried new ones. They exchanged book recommendations as well. Laura was currently reading a book that Tanya lent to her a couple of days prior when they invited us over for dinner. I couldn't get past this creeping paranoia that something bad was going to happen to them. Should we go over there and check on them? Just in case? I asked her, knowing how it sounded. I'm sure Dion has it covered. He's tough as nails, she responded, but with a faraway worry in her voice. Let's call them tomorrow, though, and make sure everything is okay. She kissed me on the cheek and started getting ready for bed. I sat in the kitchen with my feelings for a while, trying to process all of the thoughts that were running through my head. When I made it upstairs, she had fallen asleep reading the book she borrowed from Tanya. I set it gently on her nightstand and crawled into bed. It was another restless night. The next day was business as usual. We both had the day off, so I made a late breakfast and sang dumb, made-up songs to our cat while I cooked. Lavra tolerates me so well. After some partially burnt pancakes and over-easy eggs, I asked her the question without really thinking about it. I should call Alex. Do you want to call Tanya too, just to cover our bases? She shot me that look again, like I grew 3 additional heads. Who's Tanya? I actually got pretty angry, but tried to contain it, spouting off a strain. Don't fuck with me like that, Lavra. That isn't cool. She was visibly taken aback by this. She was disgusted by my use of language, but also trying to solve an invisible equation in her head. I'm sorry, what? She half coughed at me. She looked serious. Lavra had a terrible poker face, and I was starting to worry that she might not be fucking with me. That was somehow worse. We saw them 2 days ago. I stuttered in disbelief. Adam, this isn't funny, she winced at me. The tables had turned. We were in equal disbelief with one another. I glanced at the book that she had carried down from the bedroom to read while I was cooking. If you don't know Tanya, then where did you get that book? I asked her, pointing a little too aggressively at it. Her eyes traced over it, and her mouth went a little slack. She squinted. She tilted her head. I don't remember, she muttered, seeming a little troubled by it. Maybe I've always had it. I could tell that she wasn't sold on that, and that she was also questioning reality at the moment. I decided to drop it for now and test the rest of the neighborhood. One time was just one of those. Things, but twice in a matter of weeks, was something that I couldn't stand for. I put on my coat and walked out the door, stopping every person I saw out and about and asking them about Alex and Tanya. They all said the same thing. They didn't know who that was, and nobody lived in that house. This was maddening. I felt like I was losing it. I went to Alex and Tanya's house, and their car wasn't there. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked intermittently for about 20 minutes, as though they would magically appear and open the door. They didn't. I climbed the fence into their backyard. Their son's tricycle was still parked by the back door. I felt vindicated and horrified by this. I looked through the windows, and the house looked abandoned otherwise. I spent about an hour wandering around their property and looking for some kind of proof that they existed, but all I found was the tricycle. Climbing in the backyard was enough. This neighborhood talked. I would never hear the end of it if I broke in. I couldn't be completely sure that this wasn't all in my head, so I left and started knocking on doors and asking people. Everyone looked at me like I was insane. I was at this for several hours. At first, I was flustered. That's an understatement. I was furious. I kept repeating to everyone that I had just seen Alex 2 days ago, and they just stared back at me with these looks on their faces like I was out of my mind. I slowly started wearing down. I stopped trying to convince people. I just thanked them for their time and moved on. The fury slowly turned into this incredible sadness and grief. I loved Alex, and the world seemed to have just deleted him like a typo, right out of existence. I might never see him again. How could I step foot into the bar during playoffs in a world that didn't remember he ever existed? When the sun started going down, I stopped by the little office that the neighborhood watch gathered in nightly between rounds. I asked if they had a log of neighborhood events, and was disheartened to find that they didn't keep one because of how rarely there were neighborhood events. I asked them about Alex and Tanya out of habit, but I was no longer surprised when they said they didn't know who that was, and that nobody lived in that house. I insisted on joining the neighborhood watch. What if this happened again? I had to know what was going on. Somebody who knew this was happening had to be available to investigate it, and I seemed to be the only person who was. They were surprised, but they could tell it meant a lot to me, and they are nice guys. So they gave me a vest and didn't question it too much. I have been at this for about a week, and not much has happened until just a minute ago. We got a call from Lara saying there were strange noises coming from outside of the house. I am on the way there right now, and terrified of what I might find, but more terrified that tomorrow I might have to continue living in a world that doesn't believe Lara ever existed. I don't know if I have to have been home to be affected. I might not be here at all tomorrow. That would almost be better. If I'm lucky, maybe I can find what is causing this and stop it. Wish me luck. I hope you all remember this tomorrow.